Livius had won Rome not just a military victory, but new citizens. And in doing so, he took a difficult yet decisive step toward Aurelius's vision of peace.
Yes, we want you.
Commodus was once the most powerful god of war in the empire, but he eventually buried the last glory of Rome with his own hands. A group of gladiators dueled in the hall, which was more like an arena where the gladiators shed their sweat and blood. The newly crowned Caesar, Commodus, was locked in combat with one of his own fighters. For him, this spectacle was far more thrilling than the burdens of governance. Just then, Lucilla appeared before him. Lucilla had journeyed from afar, not to renew ties with her brother, but to deliver a warning potent enough to shake the very foundations of the kingdom.
You are pushing our eastern provinces to rebellion.
Commodus scoffed at his sister's warning, reveling in Caesar's supreme power and believing he could do as he pleased. Lucilla, heartbroken, accused him of destroying the very legacy their father had built with his life's work. The siblings' quarrel tore open a rift that had long existed within the family. Commodus believed it was his sister who had poisoned their father's mind against him. He even turned the argument toward their late mother, insisting that it was Lucilla's coldness that had led to her death. Commodus recalled their mother's final moments, his words laced with bitterness and accusation. Overcome with rage, he pressed Lucilla relentlessly, trying to force her to reveal a long-buried secret. At that very moment, Phelibus appeared, watchful and tense. But Commodus waved him off. Within this palace, no one could harm him. Meanwhile, General Livius, triumphant on the battlefield, was leading his legions home. The gates of Rome swung open, and the people's cheers thundered through the city. Yet beneath the glory, a political storm was quietly gathering. Commodus had already caught wind of Livius's vision for a new Rome, and it filled him with suspicion and hostility. He tried to use his authority to silence Livius, forbidding him from presenting his reform plan to the Senate. But Livius stood firm. He was determined to do what he knew was right. When threats failed, Commodus offered a final temptation. If Livius abandoned his plan, he promised, he would allow him and Lucilla to be together. Elsewhere, Lucilla wrestled with love and duty. She loved Livius deeply and could not imagine life without him. In the past, a misunderstanding had driven them apart, but now she finally understood. Livius was the true heir to her father's ideals, and yet reality kept them apart. In the end, love triumphed over fear. Lucilla urged Livius to create the world they had dreamed of, and vowed to stand beside him against every obstacle. Inside the Senate chamber, the atmosphere was solemn and heavy. Livius's proposal was made public. He sought to grant Roman citizenship to the defeated barbarians. The announcement sent shockwaves through the conservative senators. Opponents declared it an outrage, a desecration of Roman tradition that would cheapen the very meaning of citizenship. They shouted that only the harshest punishments for prisoners of war could preserve the might and dignity of Rome. When it came time for Livius to speak, he surprised everyone. He refused to argue as a general. Instead, he ceded the floor to the philosopher Timonides. Once a slave, Timonides now stood as a free man in the empire's highest chamber. He spoke with the clarity of a teacher, offering a simple analogy. If a student fails to learn despite endless punishments, perhaps the problem lies not with the student, but with the lesson or the teacher. Rome had tried again and again to teach its enemies through war and slaughter, but instead of peace, it had reaped only hatred, an endless cycle that would never die. Hatred breeds war. War brings crushing taxes, famine, and disease. It was, Timonides warned, a vicious circle with an unbearable cost. One senator erupted in anger, calling the speech treason. The barbarians' true goal, he thundered, was to destroy Rome itself. Opponents dug in, insisting the captives be enslaved, but Timonides countered with economics. The age of slavery, he argued, had already passed. Free men were far more productive than slaves. Then another senator rose to speak. Rome's strength, he declared, came from force and authority, not from notions of equality, liberty, or peace. Those, he sneered, were the words of slaves. To him, beyond the frontier lay millions of enemies waiting for the chance to strike. Any gesture of kindness would be seen as weakness, and weakness would mean the empire's destruction. One venerable senator warned that Rome would not fall in a single collapse, but at the very moment its people ceased to believe in it. He recalled the achievements of 4 emperors before them, showing how Rome had grown only through change and renewal. The law of life, he said, was simple: grow or perish. He implored the Senate, the very heart of Rome, to speak with a voice of change, to prove to the world that Rome would not fall. The call for reform drowned out the voices of the conservatives. At last, the Senate passed Livius's proposal. When the victory was announced, Lucilla and Livius embraced tightly. Overcome with emotion, Lucilla believed that if the army and the people rose together to overthrow Commodus, Rome could be reborn. But their joy was short-lived. Commodus appeared before them, convinced that everything was part of a conspiracy against him. Outwardly, he submitted to the Senate's decision, but behind the scenes he unleashed a storm of vengeance. He stripped Livius of his command and banished him to the far northern frontier, condemned to endless patrols. At the same time, he forced Lucilla back to Armenia, tearing the lovers apart once more. Years passed. On the desolate frontier, Livius held the line. He brought peace to the borderlands, but inside, he carried only loneliness and a growing ache for Lucilla. Then one day, the silence of the frontier was shattered by a summons from Caesar. Livius was recalled to Rome. The northern tribes he had once defended now thrived, enjoying prosperity and abundance. Timonides marveled that whether in kindness or cruelty, the human spirit could create miracles. But Rome itself had become a nightmare. Famine and plague swept through the city, claiming tens of thousands of lives. Fearing the worst, Livius raced back at full speed. In the empty palace, he encountered Commodus, abandoned by all. The once proud Caesar now stood alone. And then came the shocking news. The entire eastern provinces had risen in revolt. Even his most loyal generals had turned their armies against him. Worst of all, Lucilla had been taken by the rebel leader, fleeing east with him. The eastern legions had already defected. Now only Livius and his hardened northern army stood between Rome and collapse. Commodus had no choice but to restore command to him. Livius knew the peril of such power, but for the sake of Rome's unity and for Lucilla, he accepted the burden. The army marched east. On the eve of battle, Livius confronted the rebel leader. He denounced him as a traitor, a threat to the empire's very survival.
Rome will not tolerate rebellion. You have threatened the empire.
We are not alone in this, Livius.
Then, a familiar figure appeared. It was Lucilla. She had not merely been taken. She was one of the masterminds of the revolt. Their aim was to build a new empire in the east, one free from the tyranny of Commodus. They asked Livius to join them, to create together a stronger, reborn Rome. But Livius could not accept tearing the empire apart, even to resist a tyrant. Lucilla, however, insisted this was the only way to prevent a far greater disaster. Lovers turned to enemies. Livius was torn apart by grief and doubt. He persuaded Lucilla to flee for the last time because he was about to lead the army and ruthlessly suppress the rebellion. But Lucilla stood her ground. Worse still, the rebels had allied themselves with Rome's ancient foe, the Persians. The uprising was no longer rebellion, but treason, a betrayal that invited the enemy inside Rome's gates. War was inevitable. Livius's northern legions clashed with the Persian host across the wilderness. Flames, arrows, steel, and blood turned the battlefield into a vision of hell. In the chaos, the rebel leader Hamas, dying of his wounds, hurled a final curse at Livius. Desperate, Livius cut his way through the enemy lines and stormed the rebel camp. Lucilla, utterly despondent, sought only death, but Livius ultimately saved her. Livius put down the rebellion and conquered Persia, and envoys from Commodus came to reward him. He was given the title Conqueror of Persia, and Commodus even offered to share the throne with him, making him co-ruler Caesar. However, behind this glory was the bloody massacre order issued by Commodus. He demanded that tens of thousands of people in the rebellious provinces be crucified or burned alive. This, Livius could not abide. Before all, he arrested the messenger, openly defying Caesar's command. He released all prisoners of war, and Timonides declared to all nations that Rome would treat them with friendship and peace. This peace would extend to the entire world. As his answer to Commodus, Livius sent a special gift.
This was his answer. Tell Caesar there will be a new Rome or a new Caesar.
Through the imperial messenger, he delivered his decision. To suppress Livius and his army, Commodus ordered the plundering of the entire kingdom for gold. He even tore down temples and statues, hoping to use the gold to annihilate his enemies. Commodus's army raided the settlements of the northern tribes, burning the peaceful villages to the ground. Timonides rushed into the burning building, attempting to awaken the soldiers' conscience with peaceful pleas. He warned that the crimes of today would leave their children burdened with endless blood debt. But his reason and compassion were silenced by a single arrow. He fell, lifeless, as fire consumed the world around him. When Livius and Lucilla arrived, they found only ruins and the body of their dearest friend. Staring into Timonides' face, Livius made his final decision. He swore to Lucilla, if he did not return by sunset, the army was to march on Rome and level the city. Inside the palace, Commodus had descended into madness. He declared himself a god, claiming that famine and plague were divine judgment, purging the weak from the world. Livius stormed into the palace with an ultimatum. He would go before the Senate and appeal to what little love they still held for the empire.
I loved you, Livius. Yet now you must die. But that's the sort of joke the gods love bears. You told me once you'd never heard the gods laughing.
In the Senate, an absurd farce is unfolding. With flowery words, the senators hailed Commodus as an invincible deity. They even proposed renaming the Roman Empire as the Empire of Commodus, and Rome itself as Commodus City. Commodus beamed with delight. At the very height of their sycophancy, Livius appeared. He demanded that they depose the tyrant who had bled the empire dry, promising the support of the army outside the walls. But the only answer he received was a chorus of fury, accusations of treason echoing from every corner. Beyond the walls, Commodus's envoys had arrived at the camp, laden with gold. They announced that Caesar himself would serve as commander and offer a bounty of 3,000 for each soldier. The promise of wealth shattered their loyalty in an instant. The legions who once followed Livius now clamored for gold, abandoning him and his ideals. When the sun set, no army came. Livius and his followers became sacrifices to a new god. The once great Roman legions had been bought for a pile of gold. And with the excuse of loyalty to Caesar, they turned their spears on their former commander. In the chaos, loyal men died shielding Lucilla. She looked on in despair. This was no longer her father's army. Only darkness and death remained. One grizzled veteran explained, once Rome's gold had rewarded soldiers for war, but in the peace of Livius's new Rome, everything had changed. Broken with grief, Lucilla sought out the gladiator Phelibus. She begged him to kill Commodus, offering everything she had, but Phelibus's words crushed her spirit. The truth was revealed. Commodus was his son, the bastard of Phelibus and the empress. When Commodus learned the secret, his world collapsed. His pride, his faith, his very identity crumbled in an instant. In a frenzy, he killed his own father with his own hands. Lucilla witnessed it all. Her cry of anguish echoed like the death knell of an empire. She ran through Rome's streets, trying desperately to awaken the people. She shouted that their dignity, their honor, their wisdom had all been stolen, that death itself now walked among them. But no one listened. Only jackals and vultures stirred in the darkness. At last, Lucilla went to the prison for a final farewell with Livius. After all their struggles and dreams, the only thing left to them was each other. She chose to share his fate, even death. The final judgment came in the arena. Commodus demanded a duel with Livius, a fight to the death to prove to the world that their god was unconquerable. The battle began. Two men, fighting for Rome's destiny and for their own obsessions, clashed in the sands. Outside the arena, Commodus's agents continued to bribe the officers. He said that no matter what the final result was, as long as he supported himself as Caesar, there would be a reward of 1 million. In the fight, Livius gained the upper hand. His blade struck Commodus, mortally wounding him. Before his death, Commodus seemed to really hear the mockery of the gods. When the tyrant's body hit the ground, the crowd erupted with cheers for Livius. The very officers who had betrayed him rushed to proclaim him the new Caesar, but Livius gave them an answer that left them stunned. He was weary of all the scheming and betrayal. The throne of Rome, once the highest honor on earth, had become a commodity to be bought and sold in the open. This was the true beginning of Rome's fall. A great civilization is not conquered from without. It destroys itself from within.